What if the chaos in your life is not caused by lack of opportunity, lack of intelligence, or lack of luck, but by the absence of an organizing principle within your own mind? And what if everything you have been calling fate, circumstance, or bad timing is actually the visible consequence of invisible mental disorder you have never disciplined yourself to confront? Most people move through life as reactions, not creators. They wake up responding to alarms they did not choose, walk into days they did not design, submit to pressures they never questioned, and call the results reality. Napoleon Hill understood something that most men never stop long enough to grasp. Life does not organize itself. It obeys organization. And the source of that organization is not external structure, not governments, not systems, not even education. It is the inner order of the human mind. Where there is no inner order, life fragments. Where there is inner order, life aligns. You have been taught to chase success as an object, as a possession, as something you arrive at someday. Hill rejected this entirely. He saw success as a condition, a mental state, a disciplined arrangement of thought that produces predictable outcomes. When the inner world is chaotic, the outer world reflects disorder. When the inner world is governed, life begins to organize itself with an almost frightening precision. This is not mysticism, it is law. Look carefully at your own life. Not at your intentions, not at your hopes, not at the person you imagine yourself to be, but at the tangible evidence. Your habits, your income, your relationships, your emotional stability, your consistency. These are not accidents. They are the physical imprint of your dominant mental patterns. Hill taught that the mind is the master blueprint. Whatever is impressed upon it repeatedly, emotionally, and with conviction will move outward into form. Disorder within produces disorder without. Discipline within produces structure without. Most people resist this idea because it removes their favorite refuge, excuse. If your life is disorganized, it is because your thinking is disorganized. If your goals shift constantly, it is because your purpose is undefined. If you start and stop, surge and collapse, feel motivated one week and lost the next, it is not because you are weak. It is because you have never imposed law upon your own mind. You have allowed impulses, moods, fears, and external noise to rule you. Napoleon Hill believed that success begins the moment a person decides to stop living as a victim of circumstance and begins living as a commander of thought. This is not about positive thinking, it is about controlled thinking. It is about deciding what thoughts are permitted residence in your mind and which are expelled without negotiation. Until you do this, your life will remain scattered, no matter how intelligent or talented you are. The tragedy is not that people fail. The tragedy is that they never organize their inner world long enough to give success a chance to form. They confuse activity with progress. They mistake busyness for direction. They work hard without aim, hope without plan, and desire without structure. Hill observed thousands of lives and saw the same pattern repeated endlessly. Men and women exhausted by effort, not because effort is wrong, but because effort without order produces nothing but fatigue. Order begins with purpose, not vague wishes, not multiple competing goals, one central aim that acts as a gravitational force around which all thoughts, decisions, and actions align. Hill called this definiteness of purpose. Without it, the mind drifts. With it, the mind organizes automatically. Purpose is not something you find. It is something you decide. And once decided, it must be guarded with ferocity. A mind without a definite purpose is like a nation without laws. Anything can enter, anything can dominate. Fear enters, doubt enters, opinions enter, distractions enter, and the person wonders why they feel pulled in 1,000 directions. Hill warned that the world will gladly decide your purpose for you if you refuse to decide it yourself. And the purpose the world assigns is always small, safe, and convenient for others. The moment you choose a definite purpose, something subtle but profound begins to happen. Your mind starts filtering reality. Opportunities that were always present become visible. Distractions that once felt irresistible lose their power. Decisions become simpler, not easier, but clearer. Life begins to organize itself around your aim because your thoughts are no longer scattered. They are aligned. But purpose alone is not enough. A weak desire produces weak organization. Hill taught that desire must burn. It must reach a level of emotional intensity where failure becomes psychologically unacceptable. Most people want comfort more than achievement, approval more than growth, safety more than mastery. Their desires are casual, polite, easily postponed. Such desires have no organizing power. They do not command the subconscious. They do not override fear. They do not survive resistance. A burning desire, on the other hand, rearranges priorities. It reorganizes time. It restructures identity. It forces discipline because the pain of inconsistency becomes greater than the pain of effort. When desire burns intensely enough, excuses collapse. The mind stops negotiating with weakness. It begins commanding behavior. Hill emphasized that this level of desire is not inherited. It is cultivated through repeated emotional focus, through visualization, through autosuggestion, through the conscious feeding of the mind with a single dominant aim. The subconscious mind does not respond to logic. It responds to repetition and feeling. Whatever you repeatedly feel as true becomes accepted as true, and whatever is accepted as true seeks express through action. This is why so many people sabotage themselves without realizing it. They consciously say they want success, but emotionally rehearse failure. They speak ambition, but visualize defeat. They claim confidence, but internally narrate doubt. The subconscious receives the dominant message, not the spoken one, and it organizes behavior accordingly. Faith, in Hill's philosophy, is not religious belief. It is mental certainty. It is the ability to hold an image of a desired outcome with such clarity and emotional conviction that the mind accepts it as inevitable. Faith eliminates hesitation. Hesitation fragments effort. Decisive faith concentrates it. A disorganized mind hesitates constantly. It second-guesses. It delays. It waits for reassurance. Hill taught that indecision is one of the greatest destroyers of human potential because it scatters mental energy. When a decision is made and held, the mind aligns behind it. When decisions are endlessly revised, abandoned, or postponed, the mind never mobilizes fully. You may think your problem is lack of opportunity. Hill would tell you your problem is lack of decision. Opportunities are attracted to decisiveness. They avoid drift. Life responds to those who know where they are going, even if they do not yet know how to get there. Imagination plays a central role in this organization of life. Not idle fantasy, but disciplined imagination. The ability to mentally construct outcomes before they exist physically. Hill observed that every achievement begins as an idea, held long enough and vividly enough to demand expression. Imagination is the workshop of the mind. If it is left unmanaged, it produces fear, anxiety, and doubt. If it is disciplined, it produces plans, strategies, and solutions. Fear is the great disorganizer. It fragments focus. It weakens desire. It undermines decision. Hill identified fear not as an external threat, but as an internal habit of thought. Fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of failure, fear of loss. These fears live in the imagination and sabotage effort before it begins. A mind dominated by fear cannot organize life towards success because it is constantly defending itself against imagined threats. Mastery of fear does not mean absence of fear. It means refusal to obey it. Hill taught that courage is not emotional bravado, but mental discipline. The disciplined mind acknowledges fear and proceeds anyway. Each time this happens, the mind becomes more ordered, more stable, more authoritative. Persistence is the cement that holds this structure together. Without persistence, purpose dissolves under pressure. Desire cools under resistance. Faith wavers under delay. Hill found that the difference between those who succeed and those who fail is rarely talent. It is persistence under adversity. The willingness to continue long after emotion has faded and results are delayed. Persistence is not stubbornness. It is loyalty to a decision. It is the refusa. To negotiate with temporary defeat. Defeat, Hill taught, is never final unless accepted as such. Most people quit not because they are beaten, but because they become mentally disorganized under pressure. They allow doubt to enter. They allow external opinions to dominate. They abandon structure and return to drift. Self-discipline is the governing force that keeps all these principles aligned. Without it, purpose weakens, desire scatters, imagination runs wild, fear takes control, and persistence collapses. Discipline is not punishment, it is protection. It protects your aim from your impulses. It protects your future from your moods. It protects your life from disorder. Hill believed that self-discipline begins with small acts of control, control of speech, control of appetite, control of time, control of emotional reactions. Each act of control strengthens the mind's authority over the body and the environment. Each act of indulgence weakens it. Over time, these small choices accumulate into either mastery or mediocrity. Your life right now is organized perfectly to produce the results you are experiencing. This is uncomfortable to admit, but it is the beginning of power. Nothing changes until you accept total responsibility for your mental habits. Hill insisted that no person can rise above the level of thinking they habitually tolerate. If you tolerate confusion, you will live confused. If you tolerate drift, you will drift. If you tolerate excuses, your life will become an excuse. The 7 principles are not steps, they are forces. When aligned, they impose order on chaos. When ignored, chaos prevails regardless of effort. Hill did not promise ease, he promised control. Control of thought, control of emotion, control of direction. From that control, everything else follows. As you listen to this, understand that this is not theory, it is diagnosis. Your life is speaking to you constantly, revealing the quality of your inner organization. The question is whether you will listen and, more importantly, whether you will act, because knowledge without application does not organize anything. It merely entertains. The moment you decide to impose order on your mind, to choose a purpose, to cultivate desire, to discipline imagination, to master fear, to decide and persist, your life will begin to reorganize itself in ways that may feel unsettling at first. Old habits will resist. Old identities will protest. Old comforts will demand preservation. This resistance is not a sign you are wrong. It is proof that change has begun. This is the opening confrontation. The moment you stop asking why life is difficult and start asking how your thinking has allowed disorder to persist. Hill taught that no man is defeated until defeat is accepted. Likewise, no life becomes ordered until order is demanded. And the demand must begin now, within you, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when permission is granted, but at the exact moment you decide that drift is no longer acceptable, and that your life will no longer be governed by chance, impulse, or fear, but by conscious, disciplined thought. Once the mind accepts that order is not a gift from life, but a command issued by the individual, the real work begins. This is where most people retreat. They like the idea of control, but not the responsibility that comes with it. Napoleon Hill was uncomfortably clear about this. The mind will either be ruled or it will be ruled over. There is no neutral state. Drift is not rest. Drift is surrender. The second phase of inner organization begins when a person confronts the truth that their emotional life has been unmanaged for years, often decades. Thoughts have been allowed to roam without supervision. Reactions have been indulged without consequence. Moods have dictated action. And the individual has mistaken this lack of internal governance for personality, spontaneity, or authenticity. Hill dismantled this illusion mercilessly. He taught that uncontrolled emotion is not freedom. It is slavery to impulse. Every emotion carries organizing power. Fear organizes behavior toward avoidance. Desire organizes behavior toward pursuit. Faith organizes behavior toward persistence. Doubt organizes behavior toward delay. The mind does not remain idle. It arranges behavior according to the strongest emotional signal it receives. If you have not consciously chosen that signal, your environment, your past experiences, and your fears have chosen it for you. This is why Hill placed such emphasis on autosuggestion, not as wishful affirmation, but as deliberate mental programming. Autosuggestion is the act of demonstrating authority over your own mind. It is the process by which you decide what ideas are allowed to take root in the subconscious. Without this process, the subconscious becomes an open field where weeds grow freely. And weeds, once established, do not ask permission before spreading. Consider how many of your current limitations began as casual thoughts, a moment of doubt that went unchallenged, a criticism that was accepted as truth, a failure that was emotionally rehearsed until it hardened into identity. Hill observed that the subconscious does not distinguish between constructive and destructive suggestions. It accepts whatever is impressed upon it with feeling and repetition. This means that most people are unconsciously programming themselves for disorder every single day. The disciplined mind does the opposite. It repeats intention. It rehearses confidence. It feeds itself images of competence, control, and purpose. Not because these things are always true in the moment, but because the mind must be trained to make them true over time. Hill insisted that you do not wait for belief to arrive before acting. You act as if belief is already established and the belief follows. This principle alone reorganizes life. When the internal dialogue changes, behavior follows. When behavior follow, results change, and when results change, identity shifts. Most people attempt to change identity first without altering thought or behavior and wonder why nothing sticks. Hill understood the sequence. Thought dominates emotion. Emotion directs action. Action accumulates into habit. Habit solidifies into character. Character determines destiny. Imagination becomes the battlefield at this stage, because imagination left unmanaged becomes the workshop of fear. The mind begins projecting worst-case scenarios, rehearsing humiliation, anticipating failure. These images are emotionally vivid and therefore persuasive. They feel real. They organize behavior toward hesitation and retreat. Hill warned that fear feeds on imagination the same way faith does. The only difference is who is in control. To organize your life, you must seize control of imagination. This means consciously constructing mental images of yourself acting decisively, persisting under pressure, maintaining discipline when discomfort arises. Not fantasies of ease or applause, but images of endurance, focus, and self-command. The subconscious respects effort. It aligns with images that carry emotional weight. When you imagine yourself as weak, the mind obliges. When you imagine yourself as disciplined, it reorganizes behavior to match. Fear mastery is not achieved by eliminating fear, but by starving it. Fear survives on attention. Every time you dwell on what could go wrong, you feed it. Every time you hesitate because of imagined outcomes, you reward it. Hill taught that courage is a habit built through repeated acts of decision in the presence of uncertainty. Each decisive act reorganizes the mind slightly more towards strength. Decision is one of the most underestimated organizing forces. Indecision scatters energy. Decision concentrates it. When a decision is made and held, the mind stops debating and starts executing. When decisions are postponed, the mind remains fragmented, oscillating between options, never committing fully to any path. Hill found that successful individuals make decisions quickly and change them slowly. Unsuccessful individuals do the opposite. This is not because successful people are always right. It is because they understand that motion corrects itself. Drift never does. A wrong decision acted upon decisively often leads to learning, adjustment, and eventual success. No decision leads nowhere. Hill saw indecision as a form of self-betrayal, a refusal to accept responsibility for direction. Responsibility is the backbone of order. The moment you accept that every result in your life is connected to your habitual thinking, you reclaim power. This is terrifying for many people. They prefer to believe they are victims of circumstance because victimhood absolves them of discipline. Hill had no patience for this mindset. He did not deny injustice or hardship. He simply refused to allow them to be excuses for mental disorder. The disciplined individual does not waste energy resenting conditions. They ask a different question: how must I think, decide, and act in this situation to move closer to my purpose? This question alone reorganizes life. It shifts focus from complaint to command, from reaction to creation. Persistence enters as the stabilizing force when results do not immediately appear. Hill taught that the subconscious often tests commitment by delaying reward. Those without persistence interpret delay as failure. Those with persistence interpret delay as training. This difference determines everything. Persistence reorganizes the emotional response to adversity. Instead of panic, there is focus. Instead of retreat, there is adjustment. Every time you persist where you previously quit, you rewrite your internal narrative. The mind begins to see you as reliable. Self-trust forms, and self-trust is one of the most powerful organizing forces a person can possess. Without it, discipline collapses under stress. With it, effort becomes steady and calm. Self-discipline must extend to emotional reactions, especially to criticism and failure. Hill identified fear of criticism as one of the most paralyzing forces in human behavior. It causes people to abandon their purpose, to gain approval, to soften decisions, to avoid disapproval, to dilute ambition to appear acceptable. This fear disorganizes life because it places external opinion above internal command. The organized mind listens selectively. It extracts information, not validation. It accepts correction without surrendering authority. It understands that criticism is noise unless proven otherwise. Hill taught that the opinions of others only hold power when accepted. Rejection of unearned authority is an act of self-discipline. As these principles integrate, something profound begins to happen. Life simplifies, not because it becomes easier, but because the mind stops chasing everything. Energy consolidates, time becomes intentional, choices become aligned. The individual begins to feel a quiet, steady sense of direction even in uncertainty. This is inner order. Most people never experience this state because they abandon the process too early. They attempt discipline for a week, persistence for a month, visualization for a moment, and conclude it does not work. Hill emphasized that the mind resists reorganization because it has been conditioned by years of disorder. Resistance is not failure, it is expected. The difference between those who organize their lives and those who remain fragmented is simple and brutal. One persists through internal resistance, the other negotiates with it. Negotiation always ends in surrender. Command leads to control. At this stage, the individual begins to recognize that success is not an event, but a state of alignment. When purpose, desire, faith, imagination, decision, persistence, and discipline operate together, life responds. Opportunities appear not because the world has changed, but because perception has sharpened. The mind now recognizes what aligns with its aim and disregards what does not. This is where many people feel uncomfortable. Order exposes waste. Distraction becomes obvious. Relationships that do not align with purpose feel heavy. Habits that once felt normal feel intrusive. Hill warned that growth often requires separation, not from people necessarily, but from patterns, from conversations that reinforce doubt, from routines that reinforce stagnation, from environments that reward drift. Inner order demands external adjustment. This is not arrogance, it is necessity. You cannot maintain mental discipline in an environment designed to erode it. The disciplined individual chooses surroundings carefully. They protect their attention like a valuable resource because it is. Attention feeds thought. Thought feeds emotion. Emotion feeds action. As your life begins to organize, you may experience moments of loneliness. This is not isolation, it is alignment. Drift attracts crowds. Discipline attracts clarity. Hill understood that those who rise often walk alone for long periods, not because they reject others, but because their direction diverges from the average. This phase is not glamorous. It is quiet. It is internal. It is marked by fewer words and more consistency, less explanation and more execution. The organized mind does not announce its plans. It acts. What you are building here is invisible to others, but unmistakable to you. A sense of authority. Thank you over your own life. A calm refusal to be pulled apart by impulse, fear, or noise. This is the foundation upon which everything else stands. If you feel resistance as you listen, that resistance is evidence that old patterns are being challenged. Hill would tell you to welcome it. Resistance means you are no longer drifting, you are directing. And direction, once established, changes everything that follows. There comes a point, once the mind has begun to impose order upon itself, where a deeper conflict emerges. This conflict is not with the world, but with the self that was built during years of drift. Napoleon Hill understood this phase intimately. He knew that the most dangerous enemy of future success is past identity. The habits, beliefs, emotional reflexes, and self-image that once kept you comfortable will now resist transformation with surprising intensity. This is where many people collapse inward, not because the principles fail, but because they underestimate the psychological cost of reorganization. The human mind craves familiarity more than improvement. It will defend known misery over unknown growth. When you begin to think differently, decide differently, and discipline yourself differently, the subconscious reacts as if under threat. Old thought patterns surface unexpectedly. Doubt returns with new arguments. Fear disguises itself as logic. Fatigue appears without physical cause. Hill warned that this is not weakness. It is conditioning fighting extinct. Sean, at this stage, the invisible mental forces he spoke of become unmistakably real. You begin to sense that thoughts are not passive events, but active agents shaping perception and behavior. You notice how a single negative assumption can drain energy from an entire day, and how a single decisive thought can restore momentum. This awareness is unsettling, because it reveals just how much of your life has been governed unconsciously. Hill taught that the subconscious mind is obedient but slow to change allegiance. It does not abandon old programs simply because new ones are introduced. It requires dominance. Dominance is established through consistency, emotional intensity, and time. This is why persistence is not optional. Without it, the old patterns regain control. One of the most critical reorganizing forces at this level is emotional self-mastery. Not emotional suppression, but emotional command. Most people believe emotions happen to them. Hill rejected this belief. He taught that emotions are responses to thoughts, and thoughts can be chosen. This idea alone, if fully accepted, dismantles victimhood completely. If you accept that your emotional state is largely self-generated, you also accept that discipline is possible. Anger, discouragement, envy, resentment, and fear are not moral failures. They are indicators of unmanaged thought. When these emotions dominate, life becomes reactive. Decisions become defensive. Purpose becomes distorted. Hill insisted that a person who cannot control emotional reactions cannot control destiny, because emotion is the fuel behind action. This is where self-discipline must deepen beyond habits and into inner dialogue. You begin observing your thoughts instead of identifying with them. You question assumptions instead of obeying them. You interrupt mental narratives that weaken you. This is not easy. It feels unnatural at first because most people have spent their entire lives believing every thought they think. But gradually, something changes. You realize that thoughts lose power when challenged. Fear weakens when examined. Doubt dissolves when exposed to evidence of past persistence. The mind begins to respect authority when authority is exercised. Each time you override an unproductive emotional reaction with a chosen response, you strengthen internal order. Hill spoke often about the power of habit, but not as a mechanical routine alone. Habit, to him, was the subconscious learning what to expect from you. If you habitually quit when uncomfortable, the subconscious expects retreat and prepares excuses automatically. If you habitually persist, the subconscious prepares endurance. It anticipates effort. It aligns resources accordingly. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single burst of discipline, followed by collapse, teaches the mind instability. Steady, repeated acts of control teach reliability. Over time, the subconscious stops resisting and starts cooperating. This is Hen effort begins to feel less heavy, not because challenges disappear, but because internal conflict decreases. Faith evolves at this stage. It is no longer blind belief or emotional excitement. It becomes quiet certainty rooted in self-trust. You trust yourself to act, to persist, to decide regardless of mood or circumstance. This form of faith is earned, not imagined. It arises from evidence that you do what you say you will do, that you endure when discomfort appears, that you remain aligned when distraction tempts. Hill considered this self-generated faith far more powerful than external encouragement. External motivation fades. Internal trust stabilizes. When you trust yourself, fear loses leverage. Doubt loses credibility. You no longer need reassurance because your behavior has become proof. Imagination, too, matures here. It shifts from dreaming about outcomes to rehearsing processes. You no longer fantasize about success as applause or reward. You visualize yourself working, deciding, enduring, refining. This grounds imagination in realism, which makes it far more effective. The subconscious responds strongly to images of action because they feel attainable. This is also where the concept of the mastermind takes on internal meaning. Hill famously spoke about alliances with others, but at a deeper level, the mastermind begins within. The conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the emotional system must operate in cooperation rather than conflict. End thoughts, feelings, and actions align. Power multiplies. When they conflict, energy leaks. Most people live with constant internal contradiction. They want success but fear effort. They desire change but crave comfort. They seek growth but avoid responsibility. This contradiction fragments life. Order demands resolution. You must decide which impulses are obeyed and which are denied. Neutrality is impossible. Decision-making becomes sharper during this phase. You begin choosing based on alignment with purpose rather than emotional relief. Short-term pleasure loses its authority. Long-term direction gains it. This does not make life joyless. It makes joy intentional rather than accidental. Hill believed that discipline does not eliminate pleasure, it refines it. Fear of failure undergoes transformation as well. Failure is no longer interpreted as personal inadequacy, but as feedback. Each setback becomes data. Each mistake becomes instruction. This mindset reorganizes emotional response to adversity. Instead of shame, there is analysis. Instead of paralysis, adjustment. Hill emphasized that successful people think in terms of causes, not effects. They ask what mental habits produce this outcome, not who or what to blame. This shift is subtle but profound. It keeps power internal. It prevents discouragement from becoming identity. As inner order strengthens, time perception changes. You become acutely aware of how time is spent. Idle hours feel uncomfortable. Meaningful SS activity feels heavy. This is not anxiety. It is alignment asserting itself. The organized mind values time because it understands that time is the medium through which purpose expresses itself. This awareness can be unsettling. You may notice how much of your previous life was spent avoiding discomfort rather than pursuing growth. Hill would say this realization is necessary. You cannot correct what you refuse to see. Guilt is not required, only responsibility. Another invisible force becomes apparent here, momentum. When thoughts, emotions, and actions align consistently, momentum builds quietly. Small wins accumulate. Confidence stabilizes. The mind begins expecting progress instead of resistance. This expectation subtly influences perception and behavior, making opportunities easier to recognize and act upon. But Hill warned against complacency at this stage. Early momentum can create the illusion that discipline is no longer required. This is a trap. Order must be maintained. Drift waits patiently for moments of fatigue or success. It re-enters through arrogance or neglect just as easily as through fear. Self-discipline must therefore become identity rather than effort. You no longer ask whether you feel like acting. You act because that is who you are becoming. Identity is one of the most powerful organizing forces in the mind. When discipline becomes self-concept, behavior follows naturally. This is also where external resistance may increase. Others may question your changes. They may feel threatened by your consistency or interpret your discipline as judgment. Hill cautioned that this is inevitable. Growth disrupts social equilibrium. The organized individual does not argue or explain excessively. They remain calm, respectful, and unmoved. Silence becomes a strength. Results become the explanation. This protects mental energy and preserves focus. The more ordered your inner world becomes, the less you need validation from outer noise. At this stage, success begins to feel less like a chase and more like construction. You are building something internally that expresses itself externally. You no longer seek shortcuts because you understand that shortcuts weaken structure. You value foundation because you have felt the cost of instability. Hill believed that this phase separates those who temporarily improve from those who permanently transform. Temporary improvement relies on mood. Permanent transformation relies on mental law. Laws do not care about motivation. They respond to consistency. You may still feel fear. You may still experience doubt. But these states no longer command behavior. They are signals, not rulers. This distinction changes everything. Emotional mastery does not eliminate emotion. It establishes hierarchy. As you continue, the mind becomes quieter, not empty but focused. Mental chatter reduces, decision fatigue lessens. There is a growing sense of inner alignment, a feeling that your actions are finally congruent with your intentions. This coherence is rare. It is also powerful. This is the point where many people realize, often with shock, that their previous suffering was largely self-generated through unmanaged thought. This realization can bring grief for lost time. Hill would tell you not to dwell there. Regret is only useful if it sharpens commitment. Otherwise, it becomes another form of drift. What matters now is continuation. The forces you are aligning do not operate overnight. They compound. Each disciplined day strengthens the structure. Each persistent effort deepens faith. Each decisive action reinforces authority. You are no longer organizing just tasks or habits. You are organizing identity. And identity, once stabilized, shapes destiny with relentless consistency. This is the silent phase of construction. No applause, no visible milestones, just internal alignment deepening day by day. Hill understood that those who endure this phase emerge fundamentally changed, not louder, not faster, but grounded. And from this ground, the outer world begins to respond in ways that feel almost inevitable, not because luck has arrived, but because order has finally been established where chaos once ruled. As inner order stabilizes, an identity begins to reorganize around discipline rather than impulse. A new and more demanding test appears. Napoleon Hill understood that this stage is where many who have developed control quietly lose it again, not through fear or weakness, but through comfort. Order, once established, creates momentum. Momentum creates progress. Progress creates relief. And relief, if not governed, invites complacency. The mind whispers that vigilance is no longer necessary. This whisper is more dangerous than doubt. Hill warned that success does not destroy men. The illusion of having arrived does. When effort begins to produce results, the ego awakens. It seeks recognition. It seeks validation. It seeks to relax standards that once felt non-negotiable. The disciplined individual must now confront a subtler enemy, self-satisfaction. Drift does not always return through failure. Sometimes it returns through success. At this level, the organizing principles must mature. They can no longer rely on emotional intensity alone. Burning desire must be converted into steady commitment. Faith must deepen into conviction independent of outcome. Discipline must become automatic. This transition is uncomfortable because it requires letting go of excitement and embracing consistency. One of the most important shifts here is the redefinition of reward. Early in the process, progress itself feels rewarding. The sense of control, clarity, and direction is intoxicating. But over time, the mind adapts. What once felt extraordinary becomes normal. Hill taught that this is not a loss of motivation, but a signal to elevate standards. The organized mind does not seek stimulation. It seeks alignment. This is where many individuals, unconscious, sabotage themselves by seeking novelty. They chase new goals not because the old ones are complete, but because the emotional charge has faded. Hill viewed this as a failure of definiteness of purpose. Purpose is not abandoned because it becomes familiar. It is fulfilled through persistence beyond novelty. Decision-making at this stage becomes more strategic and less reactive. You begin to understand the long arc of effort. You accept that meaningful achievement unfolds over years, not weeks. This perspective reorganizes patience. Waiting is no longer passive. It becomes an active part of the process. You continue building even when visible progress slows. Imagination, now disciplined, serves a different function. Instead of fueling motivation, it sustains direction. You imagine the consequences of consistency and the cost of abandonment. You visualize long-term outcomes, not to excite emotion, but to anchor commitment. This form of imagination is sober and powerful. Hill spoke of the invisible forces that respond to organized thought. He observed that when a person remains aligned over time, external conditions begin to rearrange themselves. Relationships shift, opportunities emerge, resources appear, not magically, but logically. The individual's behavior changes, and the environment responds accordingly. This can create a dangerous illusion that life has become easier. In truth, the individual has become more capable. Confusing these two leads to overconfidence. High. LL cautioned that humility is not self-denial but accurate self-assessment. The disciplined mind remains aware that order must be maintained daily or it will erode. Fear takes on a new form here. It is no longer fear of failure but fear of stagnation. The organized individual becomes acutely sensitive to any sign of internal decay. Laziness, rationalization, emotional indulgence. These signals trigger immediate correction. This vigilance is not anxiety, it is respect for the process. Self-discipline now extends to thought quality, not just thought content. You begin to notice subtle forms of mental drift, daydreaming without purpose, indulging in resentment, rehearsing imagined conversations. These habits may seem harmless, but Hill understood their cumulative effect. Every uncontrolled thought weakens authority slightly. Every controlled thought reinforces it. This stage demands refinement of autosuggestion. Affirmations become precise, purposeful, and grounded in action. You no longer repeat statements you do not believe. You affirm behaviors you are committed to executing. This builds integrity between thought and action, which strengthens self-trust. Persistence transforms again. It is no longer fueled by struggle, but by identity. You persist because stopping would violate who you are becoming. This internal standard is far more reliable than external pressure. Hill considered this the hallmark of true success psychology. The individual becomes self-governing. Now distractions increase at this level. Success attracts demands, opportunities, and noise. Everyone wants access. Everyone has an opinion. The organized individual must now practice selective engagement. Saying no becomes as important as saying yes. Time and attention are protected fiercely, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Hill emphasized that self-discipline includes the courage to disappoint others in service of purpose. This is one of the most difficult lessons. People often sacrifice long-term destiny to preserve short-term harmony. The organized mind understands that misplaced loyalty is a form of self-betrayal. Relationships evolve here. Some deepen through mutual respect, others fade quietly. This is not cruelty, it is alignment. Hill believed that growth often requires the courage to release attachments that no longer support direction. Clinging to misaligned relationships drains energy and invites drift. Emotional mastery reaches a new depth. You are no longer reactive even to success or praise. Approval does not inflate you. Criticism does not destabilize you. Emotional equilibrium becomes the norm. This stability is not indifference, it is strength. At this stage, many people experience a sense of isolation, not loneliness, but separation. The average concerns of others feel distant. Conversations centered on complaint, gossip, or distraction lose appeal. Hill would say this is the price of self-command. Few are willing to pay it. Those who do guy. And clarity. The mind begins to operate with greater economy. Fewer thoughts, more precision, less emotional turbulence, more focus. This efficiency frees energy for creative problem solving. Imagination now collaborates with logic. Ideas are evaluated, refined, and executed systematically. Failure, when it occurs, is handled swiftly and quietly. There is no drama, no self-flagellation, no retreat. The organized individual adjusts and continues. Hill believed that emotional overreaction to failure is a form of ego. The disciplined mind values progress over pride. This phase also introduces the responsibility of example. Others may begin to observe your consistency. Some will be inspired, others will feel threatened. Hill warned against both vanity and concealment. You do not perform discipline for applause, nor do you hide it to avoid discomfort. You simply live it. Success in Hill's philosophy is ultimately about service, not charity, but contribution. The organized mind seeks to apply its discipline beyond itself, to build, to lead, to create value. This outward expansion tests inner order. Power magnifies flaws as well as strengths. The question becomes whether your inner governance can withstand increased responsibility. Many people unconsciously sabotage growth to avoid this test. They remain small because growth demands greater discipline. Hill insisted that leadership begins with self-leadership. If you cannot govern yourself, you cannot be trusted to govern outgo. Mays that affect others. At this stage, purpose often clarifies further. It becomes less about personal gain and more about meaningful impact. This does not diminish ambition, it grounds it. The organized mind recognizes that fulfillment comes from alignment with something larger than ego. Time continues to feel different. You think in terms of decades. Decisions are weighed against long-term consequences. This perspective simplifies choices. What does not serve the future is discarded without regret. Hill taught that sacrifice is not loss when it preserves direction. The invisible forces Hill described become almost tangible now. Intuition sharpens, judgment improves, patterns are recognized quickly. This is not mysticism. It is the result of a disciplined mind processing information efficiently. You are no longer chasing success. You are embodying the conditions that produce it. This distinction is subtle but transformative. Chasing implies lack. Embodying implies alignment. Yet Hill would remind you that this stage is not an endpoint. It is a plateau that requires constant maintenance. Order is not permanent. It is a practice. The moment you assume it will sustain itself, it begins to decay. This awareness keeps the organized individual grounded, hungry but not desperate, confident but not careless, focused but not rigid. These balances are delicate and must be adjusted continuously. The work now is quieter than ever, less visible struggle, more internal calibrati. On. The rewards are deeper, a sense of coherence, a life that feels intentional rather than accidental, a mind that responds rather than reacts. You have moved far from where you began, but Hill would insist that the distance traveled does not matter as much as the direction maintained. Direction is destiny, and as long as direction is guarded with discipline, imagination, faith, and persistence, the structure you have built will continue to support growth, responsibility, and the kind of success that organizes not just your life, but the lives you touch. By the time a person reaches this stage, the struggle is no longer visible to the outside world. The chaos has been subdued. The habits have been disciplined. The identity has been reshaped. And yet Napoleon Hill knew that the most decisive phase of the entire process unfolds here, quietly, internally, without drama or announcement. This is where success either becomes permanent or begins its slow, silent decay. The fifth phase is about consolidation of power, not external power, but inner authority. Up to this point, discipline has been something you practice. Now it must become something you embody. The mind no longer negotiates with weakness because weakness is no longer granted legitimacy. This does not mean temptation disappears. It means temptation loses its persuasive voice. Hill understood that every human being lives under the influence of invisible mental habits that eventually harden into destiny. At this saint age, you become acutely aware that your dominant thoughts are shaping not just outcomes, but perception itself. You no longer see the world as most people do. You see patterns, causes, psychological laws at work beneath surface events. This awareness brings responsibility. You cannot unsee it. This is where many people feel an unexpected weight, not pressure, but gravity. The gravity of knowing that excuses are no longer available. That drift is no longer innocent. That self-deception has been exposed. Hill believed that this realization separates those who are temporarily disciplined from those who are permanently self-directed. The permanently self-directed individual does not need reminders. their standards govern them. At this level, self-discipline reaches its most refined form, internal consistency. You do not merely act with discipline when observed or motivated. You act with discipline because incongruence feels intolerable. When thoughts, words, and actions are misaligned, the discomfort is immediate. This internal feedback system is one of the strongest organizing forces a person can develop. The subconscious now trusts you. This is a critical point in Hill's philosophy. When the subconscious trusts the conscious mind, resistance diminishes. Fear no longer sabotages action automatically. Doubt no longer paralyzes decision-making. Emotional energy becomes available for creation instead of defense. Faith evolves again here. It is no longer belief in a future outcome. Me. It is belief in process. You trust that consistent application of mental law will produce results over time, regardless of temporary appearances. This kind of faith is unshakable because it is not attached to immediacy. It is anchored in understanding. Hill often emphasized that impatience is not a flaw of desire, but a flaw of faith. When faith is weak, the mind demands constant proof. When faith is strong, the mind remains steady without it. At this stage, impatience fades. You are willing to work in silence. You are willing to build without recognition. You understand that delayed reward is not denial. Imagination now functions as strategic foresight. You simulate consequences before acting. You anticipate second-order effects. This allows you to move with precision rather than force. Hill observed that truly successful individuals waste little energy. Their actions are measured, intentional, and aligned with long-term structure. Decision-making becomes increasingly solitary, not because others are excluded, but because ultimate responsibility rests with you. You listen, evaluate, and decide without surrendering authority. This independence is not defiance, it is maturity. Hill taught that no one can live your life for you, and no one should be allowed to think for you. Fear at this stage is subtle. It may appear as caution, as rational delay, as concern for balance. Discernment is required. The organized mind must distinguish between wisdom and avoidance. Hill wore, Ned, that fear often disguises itself as prudence when discipline has advanced. The test is alignment. Does the hesitation serve purpose, or does it protect comfort? Comfort is the final seduction. Physical comfort, emotional comfort, social comfort, intellectual comfort. Hill believed that growth ends the moment comfort becomes sacred. The disciplined individual does not seek discomfort for its own sake, but neither do they flee it. They remain willing to experience temporary strain to preserve long-term alignment. This stage also brings a heightened sensitivity to mental contamination. Negativity, cynicism, and habitual complaint stand out sharply, not because you feel superior, but because you feel their disruptive effect immediately. Hill emphasized that the mind is a delicate instrument. What it absorbs shapes its output. You become selective not out of judgment, but out of self-preservation. Time is now treated with reverence. You recognize that wasted time is not neutral. It is theft from purpose. This does not mean every moment is productive. It means every moment is intentional. Rest is chosen deliberately. Leisure is bounded. Distraction is minimized. Hill taught that mastery of time is mastery of life. Another critical shift occurs here: emotional independence. Praise no longer elevates you. Criticism no longer destabilizes you. You do not reject feedback, but you are not ruled by it. This emotional neutrality allows clarity. Decisions are made based on principle. E, not reaction. Hill considered this a mark of leadership psychology. The sense of identity at this stage is stable but not rigid. You know who you are becoming, but you remain open to refinement. Arrogance is replaced by quiet confidence. You no longer need to prove discipline. You live it. You no longer announce purpose. You execute it. Service takes on greater importance here. Hill believed that success detached from contribution becomes hollow. The organized mind naturally seeks expression beyond self-interest. This does not mean sacrificing ambition. It means expanding its scope. Purpose deepens when it connects to value creation. Responsibility increases accordingly. You may find yourself in positions where others depend on your clarity, consistency, and judgment. This is a test of inner order. Power magnifies flaws. Any unresolved indiscipline will surface under pressure. Hill warned that leadership without self-mastery is destructive. At this stage, you understand why most people never reach sustained success. It is not because they lack intelligence or opportunity. It is because they resist the psychological demands of permanence. Temporary effort is easy. Permanent discipline requires identity transformation. You also begin to see how easily order can decay if neglected. A few undisciplined weeks, a few rationalized indulgences, a few deferred decisions. Drift does not announce its return. It seeps in quietly. This awareness keeps you vigilant without becoming rigid. The invisible forces Hill described now operate smoothly. Intuition guides decision-making. Insight emerges unforced. Problems are solved with less struggle. This is not luck. It is alignment. When the mind is ordered, it processes reality efficiently. You no longer confuse motion with progress. You measure success by adherence to principle, not by emotional highs. This internal metric keeps you grounded during both victory and setback. There is a calm intensity to this phase, a sense of being internally anchored while externally active. You are no longer searching for yourself. You are expressing yourself deliberately. Hill believed that this stage is where destiny begins to feel less like chance and more like consequence. You see clearly how yesterday's thoughts produce today's reality. This clarity reinforces responsibility. It also reinforces power. You may experience moments of solitude here, not from isolation, but from clarity. Few people think at this level. Fewer still are willing to live by it. Hill would tell you that this solitude is not a loss. It is space. Space to think deeply, to act precisely, to build intentionally. The work now is subtle but relentless, refinement rather than overhaul, calibration rather than correction. You adjust habits, sharpen focus, recommit to standards. This ongoing maintenance is the price of permanence. You are standing near the threshold of something most people never reach, self-command that does not require effort. To sustain. But Hill would caution you here. This threshold is guarded by one final demand. Total responsibility, not just for actions, but for thoughts, not just for outcomes, but for direction, not just for success, but for the person you are becoming. And beyond this threshold, there is no return to ignorance, only forward into full ownership of life, purpose, and destiny. There is a moment, rare and unmistakable, when a human being realizes that nothing outside of them is coming to rescue them, validate them, or complete them, and instead of feeling despair, they feel power. Napoleon Hill understood this moment as the final awakening. Not awakening to hope, not awakening to possibility, but awakening to responsibility so total that it leaves no room for illusion. This is the moment when success ceases to be a goal and becomes a command. Up to now, you have been building inner order. You have disciplined thought, governed emotion, sharpened decision, mastered persistence, refined imagination, and accepted the laws that rule mental life. But none of this matters unless it culminates in one uncompromising truth. You are the sole architect of your destiny, not partially, not symbolically, completely. Hill taught that the final barrier to permanent success is the last refuge of excuse, the subtle belief that something somewhere must change before you can fully commit. Conditions, timing, support, understanding, permission. As long as any of these remain sacred in you, our mind control is incomplete. Order is conditional, and conditional order collapses under pressure. This final stage demands absolute ownership. Ownership of your thoughts even when they are uncomfortable. Ownership of your decisions even when they lead to difficulty. Ownership of your failures without resentment. Ownership of your potential without apology. Hill believed that greatness begins where self-pity ends. Here, fear attempts one last transformation. It no longer appears as doubt or hesitation. It appears as reasonableness, as moderation, as the suggestion that you have already done enough. That balance requires retreat. That intensity should soften. This is the most dangerous form fear ever takes because it feels mature. Hill warned that many lives are quietly dismantled here, not through collapse, but through slow dilution of purpose. You must understand this clearly. The mind never stands still. It either advances under discipline or regresses under neglect. There is no maintenance mode. Every day you either reinforce order or invite drift. Every day you either command your inner world or surrender authority to habit, emotion, and environment. The price of success, Hill insisted, is eternal vigilance over the self. This is not a burden. It is a privilege. To govern oneself fully is the highest form of freedom a human being can achieve. Freedom from mood, freedom from fear, freedom from the opinions of others, freedom from the tyranny of circumstance. At this stage, life no longer feels random. Events may still surprise you, but they do not destabilize you. You understand causation. You recognize that today's reality is yesterday's thinking made visible. This understanding removes anger from adversity and arrogance from achievement. It replaces both with responsibility. You are no longer seeking certainty from the world. You generate it internally. This internal certainty allows you to act decisively, even when outcomes are unclear. Hill taught that clarity of direction matters more than clarity of outcome. Those who wait to see the entire path never move. Those who commit to direction create the path through action. This is where imagination and faith unite fully. You do not merely believe in what you want. You believe in who you are becoming through disciplined action. You trust the laws you are obeying. You trust the structure you have built. You trust yourself to persist without reassurance. This trust is unshakable because it is based on behavior, not emotion. The world may not notice this transformation immediately. That is irrelevant. Hill warned against measuring progress by applause. Applause is noise. Alignment is truth. Results will follow law, not opinion. At this level, your life begins to exert quiet influence, not through force, but through example. Others may sense your stability, your clarity, your refusal to be pulled into chaos. Some will be drawn to it. Others will resist it. Neither response matters. Your responsibility is not to manage reactions. It is to maintain command. This is the point where success becomes irreversible, provided you do not betray it. Betrayal does not look like failure. It looks like compromise of standards. It looks like postponed decisions. It looks like indulged weakness justified by past effort. Hill was explicit. Yesterday's discipline does not excuse today's neglect. You must now decide, not emotionally, but intellectually and irrevocably, that drift is no longer an option in your life, that excuses are no longer tolerated, that comfort will never outrank purpose, that fear will never outrank direction, that opinion will never outrank principle. This decision is not made once. It is made daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes moment by moment. But each time it is made, it strengthens the structure within you. Each time you act in alignment despite discomfort, you deepen self-command. Each time you refuse to abandon purpose under pressure, you reinforce destiny. Hill believed that the ultimate tragedy is not failure, but unused potential. Potential wasted not through catastrophe, but through hesitation, through delay, through living at half command, through knowing what must be done and negotiating instead of acting. You are past the point of ignorance. You know the laws now. You know that thought shapes emotion, emotion shapes action, action shapes habit, habit shapes character, and character shapes destiny. To pretend otherwise is self-deception, and self-deception is the enemy of all greatness. So now the demand is clear and unavoidable. Decide who you are, not in words, but in behavior. Decide what your life stands for, not in intention, but in discipline. Decide what you will tolerate from yourself and enforce it without negotiation. Choose a purpose and organize your entire mental life around it. Feed it daily with thought, emotion, imagination, and action. Persist when results delay. Act when fear speaks. Decide when doubt whispers. Discipline yourself when comfort tempts you to retreat. Take total responsibility for your mind. Total responsibility for your direction. Total responsibility for your future. No one is coming to organize your life for you. No system will save you. No circumstance will excuse you. The power you have been waiting for has always been waiting for your command. So issue it right now. Decide that from this moment forward, your life will no longer be a reaction, but a creation. that your mind will no longer be a battleground but a fortress, that your purpose will no longer be postponed but pursued with relentless consistency, that you will demand order from your thoughts, courage from your decisions, discipline from your actions, and persistence from your soul. This is not motivation. This is instruction. Stand up internally. Take command mentally. Commit completely, and then live every single day as proof that you meant it.